Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you may have noticed that there's a little bit of a difference. Normally on our YouTube version of the podcast, we've just had a slideshow of images that kind of overlay the audio recording. But this is our first time having actual video feed of myself and the guests, as well as the images of what we're talking about. So if you'd like to actually see us in conversation, feel a little more part of the conversation as you are listening to the podcast, make sure to jump over right now to the Marvel Snap Zone YouTube channel and check out the podcast there. The plan going forward is to have the video present, so we would love to have you check it out on the Marvel Snap Zone YouTube channel. With all that being said, we will jump into today's episode. But before we start talking about our topics, I'd like to introduce our guest, who is a returning guest, Den, a fellow contributor to Marvel Snap Zone. Den, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Last time was terrific, so I'm very happy to be back.
Yeah, no, you and me were talking this week. We have a couple of things we want to talk about. You just expressed it to me a minute ago. We have some difficult topics we want to cover today, but we're going to try to break it down as best as we can for the listeners and see how we go. So we will start out with our normal topic, which is the newest card of the week, and that is Nimrod. So Nimrod is the season pass card. We just started a new season, Days of Future Past. And Nimrod is a 5-cost, 5-power card that reads, when this is destroyed, add a copy to each other location. I definitely got excited when, this leaked as the season pass card a couple of months ago, because I just love Destroy archetype in Marvel Snap. And so I was very excited to have something that felt different than a lot of the season pass cards we've had lately. But we were maybe a day and a half into having Nimrod in the game. So I want to turn it over to you first, Dan. What are your general impressions of Nimrod thus far from what you've seen?
I think from a design standpoint, like flavor-wise, I really like it. For a very long time, there were criticizes around like the locations, and I think it was in January when there was like a flurry of locations that were all destroy oriented at some point. Like we had, I think it was like a Riggedy Bridge and Altar of Death and like all locations, and people kind of got tired of it, and it kind of brought like armor to be the staple it is today, and Destroy kind of died out. So I really like that Destroy is finally getting back some new things, and now like Galactus is a little more available to people, and it's kind of the only Destroy in the game that plays around armor because it destroys no matter what. So I think it was a really good timing to bring Destroy back as a synergy and like remind everyone like, hey, remember, like that's a pretty good synergy, and you can build decks around it. So I think the timing and the flavor of the card was really good. Unfortunately, there are other things that are keeping it in the shadow right now, and that's just unfortunate. I don't think it's Nimrod's fault by any measure.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just transitioning from what you said. I can't agree more that unfortunately, I don't think Nimrod has had the room to shine that the last couple of season pass cards have had. Things like, I guess you could argue that MODOK was maybe similar, but I almost feel like MODOK saw more play than what I'm seeing of Nimrod.
But MODOK had a crazy like first 2 weeks.
Yes.
This card was super popular back then. Well, Nimrod is for now off to a much slower start compared to MODOK.
Yeah, and then obviously if we go back another 2 months before that, we had Zabu and Silver Surfer, which really were meta-defining in their time. So definitely Nimrod feels on the less meta-defining side. And a couple thoughts there. I agree with you. I don't think it's Nimrod's fault. I think Nimrod is a very fun card, a very unique card. But with the current meta, with a lot of Leech being played, I saw some clips from multiple creators of just kind of trying to play Nimrod, but being leeched or being arrowed or all these things, right, are very strong counters against Nimrod. And so unfortunately, people are still playing the decks they were playing the week before Nimrod came into the game. And so those decks just happen to be really great counters to what Nimrod can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly Leech and I guess kind of other things, not in general, but like other decks and the way they work. Like Arrow is extremely popular, which is annoying when you're trying to play Galactus. Armor, we talked about it. Cosmo is also a pretty popular card. Like, there's a lot of things that go against Destroy, back from the time where Destroy was arguably the best synergy in the game. And like, I think it's really the fact that at some point Destroy was the best synergy in the game. People started adapting to it, and then people realized, like, but these are just good cards. Like, even if there's no Destroy in the meta, I mean, Armor is a 2/3, Cosmo is just overall good, Aero is amongst the best card in the game. So these cards just stayed, and every time like Destroy comes back, is just like, why is everyone running tech cards against me? And it's just because they're good cards at this point.
Yeah. It's been a little tough going there for Nimrod, but I would like to talk about what potential does he have, because I still think there are some fun decks that can be built around Nimrod that I hope have even a greater chance to shine down the road. Right? Maybe they're not in the best spot in this moment, but I would love to see them grow. So one thing I want to talk about, kind of what I think maybe one of the best synergies, is Arnim Zola, and
Love it.
I'll explain the context there, because obviously we all know Arnim Zola. You destroy the card, destroy a card at that location, and create a copy at each other location. Well, that sounds great, but that's kind of already what Nimrod does. But that's good, because when you actually destroy Nimrod with Arnim Zola, you get 2 copies of Nimrod at each location. Because Nimrod's text say when Nimrod's text says when this card is destroyed, create copies at the other location. So it's destroyed. It does that, but then Arnim Zola's text will then create additional copies. So especially if you've done something like a Shuri into Nimrod, so you get a 10 power Nimrod, and then you destroy it with Arnim Zola, you're adding 20 power to 2 other locations, potentially on the last turn of the game, which I think that's the most powerful combo I've seen thus far when it works. Now, often somebody arrows on turn 6 and pulls the Arnim Zola to a different location, things like that, or Cosmo. But maybe what other synergies or ideas have you seen people trying out with Nimrod in the last 24 hours?
I think definitely by far the most popular has been Galactus. Although, like, unfortunately, like, I personally don't think it was good enough, and like Aero is way too popular, and these kind of cards. I really like Arnim Zola, as you mentioned. Like, I think Electro just loves that Nimrod is just another Arnim Zola target, because we already had like the Black Panther synergy. So there's just like ways of branching these. So this is something that I think is really fun. I have seen a couple of people try it. Like, I've tried in Deadpool, like mainly like decks that are able to double destroy Nimrod on 6.
Yeah.
So like because like most destroy, like the cheap ones are like 2 or 3, so you try to double destroy. So kind of like patterns where you would go Shuri on 4, Nimrod on 5, double destroyed on 6, these kind of things. But kind of the same thing is like, if you just compare it to Shuri 0, why don't you just do Shuri into Red Skull into copy it at the end of the day? So for now, like, Nimrod is in this kind of weird like place where there are definitely good things to do with the card, but it's just, if you compare it, there's always something that you're like, yeah, that's just better, unfortunately. And hopefully, like, we should be due a balance patch. I mean, everyone now has asked for it, I think, at this point. And I think when that's gonna hit, Nimrod could be a really, really super fun card to experiment around.
Yeah, you make an interesting point. It feels like Nimrod's it does something unique, but you can kind of, in the decks you can put him in, there's other cards that can accomplish the same goals of trying to win locations, right? Shuri 0 being a great example, right? Why not just play what we've already been playing and seen so much popularity with, which is a little sad, right? Because my hope is that each card can kind of be its own thing and really make something unique, right? Not every card's going to do that. We have tech cards. You're never going to have a Shadow King deck, right? That's built around Shadow King as a strategy, right? Because it's just a tech card. But I would love to see Nimrod truly shine, like you say, potentially after a patch or some changes that are made that maybe balance out the counters to Nimrod currently. I'd be really interested to see how that plays out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, same. Like,
yeah. So continuing on, I think Nimrod's a really interesting card. I'm excited to see, hopefully, it do a little bit better in the future. But the next topic we'd like to cover is some changes made to the game and how certain things are done in the last week. So first off, we'd like to talk about the upcoming changes to featured and hot locations. So this was tweeted out a couple of days ago at time of recording. And there's a couple changes here. One, they have lowered the time for the featured locations when new locations come out normally on, depending on, what time zone you're in, Monday, Tuesday, or maybe, sorry, it's Tuesday, Wednesday. Those will no longer be featured for 48 hours. They will only be featured for 24 hours. This is something we've talked a lot about on previous podcast episodes, right? Like, what if they lowered the time? Wouldn't that be nice? And maybe we wouldn't be pulling our hair out. So I think that was the most obvious change, right? To make those shorter so that, if it's a little bit of a frustrating location, it's just one day and, then it's over, right? But I think the more interesting change to me with this that I didn't see specifically coming is that they are going to be releasing less new locations, is what they've said, per season, right? So sometimes that feature location that's earlier in the week, because the hot location is over the weekend, will be an already existing location. So that one I didn't see as, that one wasn't as apparent to me or necessary to me. So I'm curious your thought on these changes, and especially that second change, if you think that was a necessary change.
I think it's maybe like that's a complete guess, but it's maybe so they can have more room to experiment on other topics. Because with the calendar that they fixed, like we were having a new location, a new card, and the location was pretty impactful for 48 hours. But usually, like, locations were either receiving like a hooray from the community, like location is so cool, we have new decks pushing, changing the meta, or it was a complete disaster. People were just tweeting out that they stopped playing Marvel Snap for 48 hours. And for cards, it was kind of the same. Like, it was either the card was super expected, people have been saving tokens, and I don't think we've had that too much yet, or it was just people complaining, like, we don't have access to the card, we can't play with it. And I think maybe reducing would give people more time to adapt, more time to prepare, and potentially, like, more time to just get ready for when these kind of things happen, which could be a good thing, I think, overall. And also open other things in the game. Like, I don't know, maybe it's stupid, but I don't know how much time they needed to get all these locations, to patch the game, to do these kind of things that obviously that should be kind of some work. So maybe now they can, I don't know, balance patch more often. Maybe they can work on, like, I don't know, videos to keep us updated, that kind of thing. Like, I mean, it takes manpower to do everything. So at some point, you gotta have your priorities straight.
Yeah, you make a lot of interesting points, and I think one of the key things that you said, and I think a lot of other creators have said, and I guess I should preface this by saying I know they're not like creating the game just for content creation, right? But one of something that content creators have run into is, they get the new card, and of course they want to make videos, they want to stream the new card, they want to do all these things, but then a featured location is the next day, right? And so then it's like, I want to play this card, but this card has horrible synergy in the new location for 48 hours, so I guess I'll play this card in 3 days from now. If they can get the card at all, right, at when it releases, that's a whole nother conversation, and changes are coming there as well. But I think that was frustrating to a lot of people, right? That it was kind of, how does the card come out this week synergize with the featured location, right? Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was really bad, and it just kind of felt like a toss-up of, am I going to be playing this card at the beginning of the week, or am I going to be playing this card at the end of the week? So I think that was interesting. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. It's like, I really like the fact that they were very active, and they were really trying to shake things up, which I think for a card game is the most important aspect of a card game. Like, you want to keep it fresh as much as possible. Like, otherwise people are just going to not complain, but they're going to say something about it because they don't feel like it's new and innovative and things like this. So I think since October, probably Marvel Snap has been one of the most active games because there were so many of these little things. I mean, if you compare to, I don't know, Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, Magic, these are like kind of old systems. You get an expansion every X time, balance patch X time after the expansion, and we just roll like this. Marvel Snap took a completely different system, which was, we're going to give you just a little bit, but you get it every single week. And the thing is, when they announced it, I haven't seen many people say it was a bad idea. A lot of people were like praising this new system, because a lot of people were like, yes, we're tired of waiting a month and a half for the meta to change, even if it's a huge change. Give us a little incremental change. But maybe they were just doing it a little too much, or it was just not enough. So I guess like Marvel Snap is what now? Like October, so that's 6 months old. It's normal that they're going to experiment with different things or they're going to try a new system. So honestly, like even if we go from 4 times a month to 2 times a month, but it's more impactful and more fun and more innovative, maybe it's going to be even better.
Yeah, you make a really great point, and I think that's interesting. I never really had thought about it in that way. Obviously, during the beta period, they were able to test a lot of things. But during the beta period, we were all going through pool 1, pool 2, pool 3, unlocking cards kind of at that initial stage. And there weren't a ton of new cards being added to the game except for season passes. And so it wasn't something
but
that
we were not feeling it. Like we didn't
Yeah.
know about it because
Yep. So they didn't really get to experiment with that like true weekly release structure until after essentially the game was released, right? So that's very interesting. So yeah, that's software for you, right? It's like you try to know how customers are going to respond to your product and the features you have, but certain things you just really can't know how they will work until you get that real world feedback. And this is probably one of those things. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. I'd like to talk about another change briefly that they made, and that is now when you are playing on ladder. Previously it was when you reach a new rank floor, we'll call it, which is every 10 levels.
yes.
You would receive essentially 10 extra cubes from where you landed. So like if you went from 79 to 80, but let's say you went to 79 to 80 and you were level 80, but you had 5 extra cubes, for example, right? You would actually go to like level 81, rank 81 with 5 cubes to, halfway to 82, right? That's how it worked before. Now, when you reach a new floor of every 10 levels, you are given 50 extra cubes or 5 extra ranks. They gave some of their reasoning that they, especially with this last season, I think a lot of people felt that people were not climbing as fast, as they were before. And there was definitely some frustration in the community of the difficult climb, especially where, depending on where you were with your MMR, to be able to climb to infinite or even just higher ranks. And so this they've said is kind of the first of potentially multiple changes. They've kind of alluded to this isn't all they're going to do with ranked climbing, but this is one change that hopefully is going to help people feel that the climb is more possible, and that they're not giving you true rank floors where it's like, okay, you can't go lower than this rank once you reach it, but it gives you that extra buff. So even if you drop down a little bit, you don't have to climb back as far up to get to the next level.
Yeah, it kind of takes a bit to lose 50 cubes.
Yeah, I've lost 50 cubes pretty fast before, but I agree with you. Normally it takes a little bit of time, but I've had my bad days where that happens in a day or two. Yeah, so what do you think about the change?
I think the change is really smart, to be honest. Like, I really like the change overall. And mostly, I think, like, the way I saw it at first, because I saw a lot of reactions and I was kind of amongst them, where I was like, why are they just feeding us the infinite rank? Like, why are they making it so easy? I don't like it. Like, let me play the game, especially as infinite, apart from a resources standpoint, doesn't really mean much. So and then like I had a talk with a friend that told me like maybe it's just because it's from a technical standpoint difficult for them to have rank floors yet. Like we don't know technologically like what do they have to implement to create rank floors. So maybe it was just a button for them, like, okay, so the 10 value, we're going to switch it to a 50 value instead of needing to code a lot of things to just implement rank floor like they have for the infinite rank. And once like I've started looking at it from this point of view, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe it's just soft rank floor because they couldn't make hard rank floor just yet, like technologically.
Yeah. That's again, I hopefully I don't sound like a broken record to listeners. My day job is I work in software, right? I work with software teams. And so like 100%, I mean, often that's how you decide on a solution. You say, well, we could do it this way and spend 6 months, coding up the technology and changing our infrastructure, or we could do it in like 3 weeks and do it this way, which gets us most of the way there, right? We get kind of the general idea and feel. So yeah, that's a really great point. I've definitely seen a lot of people, I guess I say a lot of people that anecdotally, like people are posting online, like I climbed to infinite in, 12 hours, first day, right? But honestly, I felt like that was happening in previous seasons anyway, right? Like you always had those people that were making that climb super fast, right? So I don't know if it's really changed because I see lots of people, lots of creators that are great at playing the game that, they're still making their climb and they're not there yet, right? Which is not a bad thing. They're still working their way up the ladder. So I think it'll be interesting. I guess where, my brain goes and we don't know is like, okay, they said there's going to be more changes. Like where do they go from here, right? Is it more just iterating on this and it is true rank floors? I'm guessing no. I'm guessing there's some other piece to this puzzle that we don't know yet that they are going to do to enhance the experience. And I don't know if you have any thoughts or guesses or anything you'd like to see. I mean, some people are saying like, oh, I think they're going to get rid of bots, right? Or change how bots work on the ladder or infinite, etc. I don't know if you have any thoughts, opinions there, or if obviously this is guesswork. This is complete guesswork, but just curious your thoughts there.
I mean, I think we would all love for bots to disappear. I think especially over the last few months, now that we've had people that mainly streamers and I'm not gonna say I know some people think of it as a bad way, but because people that reach rank, I don't know, 700, 1,000, of course they're playing against bots. And I've seen a lot of people say, but why are they abusing bots? It makes no sense. It's not interesting for the game. Why would you want to do this? And the thing is, maybe they just don't have a choice. Simply because, well, they're streamers. Their job is to create content. So once they reach that point where they face mostly bots, what are they supposed to do? Stream something else for the rest of the season?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that problem where, I mean, they've committed, they have a community, they have people expecting them to play Marvel Snap. And so, yeah, the solutions are you go back to a new account or you play against bots. It's not rocket science. You either go back to the start of the line or you just push the line even further where nobody is. And so, yes, definitely this month, I think Educated Collins, mostly KM Best, all these kind of guys that have broken the MMR of Marvel Snap, basically, have said we're not having fun. The people that are abusing bots want the bots gone. We're not having fun. This is not a good experience. So I think it should be amongst their priorities. But at the same time, there's the other part of the players, those that aren't in these bot MMRs and things like this, that kind of want to climb. And it's a little sad to say it this way, but sometimes when you're facing the best decks in the game and things like this over and over again, facing a bot once in a while kind of helps the climb.
Yeah.
So it's really weird because I feel on the bot problem, I think no one is going to say no, I want to keep the bots. I think everyone wants them gone, but at the same time, if you remove them, I think a lot of people are going to be frustrated because the climb is going to be so much harder instantly.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword, I think. It's really hard to please everyone. The question is, who do we please, and how do we make it that they're pleased but the others aren't feeling left out or something like this?
Yeah, I'll be first to raise my hand and say, I am okay with the, I feel good when I get the occasional bot. Maybe I'm having a rough day with my climb and I'm kind of stagnant in my climb, and then I just get that bot that just gifts me 4 or 8 cubes with some bad plays. Obviously that I realize that if I remove myself from the moment, I'm yeah, was this as fun as playing against a real person and emoting and thinking about the strategy more? It's not, right? But it definitely feels okay, I'm still making a little bit of progress, even if I'm having a hard time against some of the more meta decks, right? So it's a tricky balance, and this is why I'm glad I'm not a game designer, because I don't know how to solve it, right? I think they're going to try to solve these types of problems that we're talking about, but how they do that exactly, time will tell, and we'll obviously be talking about it when that happens. But I definitely think they have room to grow, room to improve here at all levels, right? For both, they have to look at it from the people that are just starting the game and are learning the game, and the people who are rank 1,000, right? That's
the real challenge. You need to please everyone.
Yeah.
And when you have such a system, their system makes it that you can't come in and be at the same level as anyone else. You have to grind Marvel Snap. It's definitely a grindy system. So when you make a change, you kind of have to think about how those people at different stages of the progression are going to be impacted. It's not like every other game where you're just like, yeah, just buy the cards.
Yeah.
So like I feel like a lot of people are, and myself included, we're coming in with our card game knowledge. We're all going like, yeah, I've been playing for 5 years, I've been playing for 10 years, I've been playing for 20 years. I know stuff. And then and then like at some point we look at like Marvel Snap specifically and we're like, yeah, but that's completely new. I don't know that stuff actually. Like I know card games, but they're like trying. I don't know if people like think they're actually doing it or not, but they're trying to push some boundaries in the card game universe. So that includes like messing up. That includes like trying stuff. That includes like collecting opinions. That's just part of the process.
Yeah. And I think they've done a good job of taking feedback, of learning, growing. But you know, as consumers, we all want it now, right? So you know, I see the discourse online. Everybody says, "Why haven't they made this change?" It's because they're not magic, right? They can't just snap their fingers and the changes are made. Some of these things are very complex problems that may require rewriting whole sections of the code that exist perfectly now, but they may have to change working things to fix broken things, right? So
true. And we don't even know what like are the intrications behind, like what contracts do they have with Marvel as a brand or things like this. Like maybe they need to like ask someone at Marvel headquarters every time they want to change the game. We don't know about these kind of things.
Yeah. But time will tell. It'll be interesting. Thank you for talking about these, changes. I think it's been an interesting week in the news, kind of the online discourse about these changes. But now I'd like to turn to our final and kind of the rest of our episode, the final segment I'd like to talk about. We're going to do our best here to try to get through as many of the decks as we can here. But many of you have reached out to me about some of the previous topics that me and Den have actually covered together, which is snapping and Marvel Snap. Den and I have had previous conversations a couple of months ago on the podcast about how to snap, when to snap, this idea of like organizing decks by snapping strategies. There's all these thoughts. And so one thing we want to talk about today is, often there are deck lists people share online. They say, oh, this is a great deck list. This is the best deck list. Or, on Marvel Snap Zone, we have a tier list that gets, updated normally weekly and, kind of shows some of the best decks. Something that people have been asking me about is, great, I have the deck now. I can see that this is the list I should be playing, but how do I snap with this deck, right? Now, obviously, there's no perfect answer to that question for each deck. But we kind of
was.
Yeah, but we're gonna maybe.
I wish I could tell anyone, hey, snap turn 3, snap turn 5. Snap.
Yeah, so we're gonna just do our best to kind of talk about some of the top tier decks from the last couple of weeks, and some general ideas, guidelines, principles, thoughts on how a snapping strategy could work for a deck like this. So we will dive in here with our first deck, and that is Lockjaw Thanos, right? So this is currently. As from the last update to the tier list from March 1st, this is what sits atop the tier list is the Lockjaw Thanos deck. We've all seen it. We've all been playing, if you're kind of higher in pool 3, etc. So obviously this will be a conversation between the two of us, but curious what your thoughts are on this first one, Dan, as far as snapping, because some of the best cards you can play on this deck kind of turn 5, turn 6, in my opinion, are Arrow and Leech. Right? Yes. Or potentially you're getting those out even earlier with Wave. Do you feel like this is kind of a hand snap deck once you have a certain hand, or is it more looking at the board, etc.? What are your snapping strategies with the Lockjaw Thanos deck?
I think part of what makes it such a good deck is that it's both. I think you can definitely snap a hand where you have like Quinjet Lockjaw or like Sunspot Lockjaw or like Lockjaw mostly. That's something you can snap. I wouldn't see like a problem snapping that kind of hand. You're gonna win more often than you don't. Or like when you have like Greenstone Lich, that's also a combo that has been doing a lot of work lately. So there are possibilities. It's not a problem that you go hand snap. Then I think the big emphasis on when to snap with this deck, and personally what I would look out like the most is try to snap early enough, because this is a deck that everyone knows about at this point. Like, you're not going to surprise many people with Lockjaw Thanos.
Yep.
So you need to snap early enough that people are going to stay in the game. It might be a little stupid to say, but like most of the time on the ladder, if you snap and they know who you are, they're going to leave. So the big part of like snapping with an extremely strong deck is trying to do it early enough so the opponent doesn't leave. So
Yeah.
to me, I think it would be a hand snapping. Currently, I would play as a hand snapping deck and trying to snap as early as possible, because people are not gonna stay once they like. If you snap once you have Lockjaw into Leech, no one's gonna stay in that situation. Like obviously, so you need to find that little like breathing room where you know you're gonna win, but your opponent doesn't yet. So I think it's around like 2 to like max 4, probably
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. No, it's, as you were talking, that's exactly kind of the range I was thinking. Ideally, because by then you kind of say like if you haven't drawn a lot of stones or you haven't drawn Lockjaw, right, and all of a sudden all you have is high cost cards in your hand that you're not going to be able to play a lot of them out, right? You kind of know by that stage you've only got a couple more draws left, and so you kind of know if you're set up to really kind of get your machine going with Lockjaw or other things like that with this deck, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so interesting thoughts on the Lockjaw Thanos deck. Next on the tier list currently is the Shuri Zero deck, right? We've already talked about this in some of our previous conversations talking about Nimrod, but man, this is a powerful deck. And my guess is you feel similarly about this as kind of a hand snap combo. That's at least how I play this deck, right? If I am on, turn 2, 3, 4, kind of that middle range again, and I have Shuri plus a big card I can play with Shuri plus like Taskmaster in my hand, it's an easy snap, right? But I guess I'm curious, that's my initial thought, but do you feel differently? Because I know some people maybe aren't snapping unless they have armor and Cosmo they can put out on the board to kind of protect themselves.
Well, it's not difficult to say, but yeah, once again, like we're kind of in a situation where you want to snap early enough so they don't leave because they just figured out you have Shuri and Red Skull and that kind of stuff. But differently to the Thanos deck where you can cheat cards and you can be a little surprised, I also think it's important to recognize when do you want to snap based on the recognition you have of your opponent. Because you have armor, because this list plays Cosmo, even sometimes a Polaris against a Galactus archetype, or like an Iroh against a Galactus. You have more tech cards, and because you don't have that energy cheating like Thanos Lockjaw has, you can like anticipate them a little bit more. I think you can have a better view of when do you want to play them, when do you want to develop them on the board, and things like this. So I think in that regard, you could have like kind of a strategy where you would snap based on tech cards. It's much more risky. I would say it's more like advanced once you really feel comfortable with the deck. But you could have these kind of like counter snaps, which is I know what you're playing. I know I have D card in the game that's a problem to you. I'm confident. I think this is also why Shuri Zero is that good. Like it's not just Shuri into Red Skull into Taskmaster. Like we found card that just complement it really well and gives it that great flexibility and makes it a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, I don't want to say something I don't actually really believe, but I almost feel like I've lost this deck more often, not because of the high power it can put out in locations. I mean, I've lost to those scenarios, or I've had to retreat often in those scenarios. But almost more often, it's probably the Polaris, the Arrow, the Cosmo, the armor, right, that has thrown me off my game because they know what I'm going to do, and they've just got the right card to counter that, right, with some of these powerful tech cards. And I have been double snapped in those scenarios, but always trying to be better at retreating in those kinds of scenarios, right? When I can kind of tell this is the deck, right? If I see armor and Cosmo, Zero, Sunspot, like these coming out at the beginning of the game, I need to know, okay, what is their possibilities for blocking me, right? And so if they're snapping, it might not be just because they have a big card that, like I could Shang-Chi. It could be that they have the ultimate defense to what I'm playing out, right? So yeah, an interesting and very powerful deck. Well, so those are kind of the ones we had at the very top, but continuing down the ladder, this is one of the ones we have on there, Sarah Control, which I have not played this one as much as the other two. So I'm probably going to lean a little bit more on here. I mean, I understand the idea here, right? You're playing kind of a Dark Hawk deck. That's one of the good things you can get out of this deck, right? With the combination of Zabu and Sarah, you can lower 4-cost cards to be 2-cost cards like you could originally with Zabu, right? So you kind of potentially have a strong turn 6 play, where you could get 3 4-cost cards out. So with that kind of a often late game play, but also kind of this control with Polaris, Killmonger, etc., where are you snapping with this deck?
This deck is, I think, one of the most difficult to figure out when to snap, because you could snap based on your hand. Like if you have Zabu, Sarah, Darkhawk in hand, you could say like, all right, we're just going off, and we're happy. And then just like Zabu, just like Shuri Zero before, but this one actually is built around that concept. We are a reactive deck, so I think we're gonna snap more based on the opponent than on us specifically. This is a Darkhawk variant, so you have a little bit more control and like anticipation on where your points are going to end up. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is trying to figure out like what is the opponent up to and what can you do against it. And once you have that, you should be almost like good to know if you're supposed to snap or not, because you know their game plan, you know your tech cards. So how do they match against each other, basically? Like that's the big question, to know when to snap. And it's honestly hard to know. Once again, like the earlier you snap, the more likely it is that they're going to stay in. But the earlier you snap and the less information you have, so more of a gamble it is. So it's really hard. Like it's kind of a bet. Like how much risk do you want to take against like how likely it is that your opponent stays in the game, kind of.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to explain this. I think the other two we've talked about maybe have a little bit more clear pattern of a style, but this one, like you say, it's really a lot of these things, Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Killmonger, Polaris, right? Like they have the potential to, really swing a location or, the power across the board in the very end game. But if you're snapping on turn 2 or 3, like you may not have drawn your full set of tech cards you're going to have to play in the end game, right? You may say, oh, I have Sarah, so I'm going to be able to play out more at the end, but there is that chance it's not going to be enough, right? So very interesting, kind of a different play style than some of the other decks we've talked about. Continue on to the next one. So we're back to another Thanos deck. And I really like this one. I really like, for listeners, this one is different than kind of the other Thanos deck. This one, you're, trying to fill up the board a little bit more. You have things like Khazar, Blue Marvel to really pump up the power of those stones across the board. You have things like Valkyrie, which is a great card where your cards are buffed. You're lowering the power of your opponent's cards, bringing your cards' power up. I think there's a lot of unique combos you can do with this deck. And I'm guessing this one plays, well, I don't know. Like, comparing this to the other Thanos deck definitely isn't apples to apples, but definitely whenever I'm playing a Thanos deck, like I'm looking at like, do I have stones to increase my draw? And do I have Quinjet? Things like that at the beginning of the game that are kind of leading me towards, should I snap or should I not? Would you agree that that's kind of like one of the patterns to look at with this deck as well?
Yeah, you definitely have a very proactive take on this deck. And I mean, it's the ongoing synergy. Ongoing synergy is very like focused on kind of itself. The only card that could push you to snap based on matchup is Valkyrie. I think it's safe to snap Shuri Zero mostly if you have Valkyrie. But yeah, otherwise it's really about like, look at your hand, know how many points you're able to develop, have a guess at how many points the opponent could develop. If you think you have more, just go for it. Like,
yeah,
that's kind of proactive decks, and what they do is like they're not necessarily trying to make things too difficult. And this is why the how was it called, the ongoing destroyer at some point like burst out onto the scene, because the deck was extremely easy to play and very effective for the requirements he was asking, like in order to play it well.
It was, you could clearly see is like, do I have the combination to lay out over the course of the game in my hand to win 2 locations, right?
Exactly.
And this plays similarly. I think, interesting with this one, right? Like you, not always, right? But like things like Valkyrie are, I think, more powerful when your opponent has the initiative, near the end of the game, right? So that they're going to play out, especially with Shuri Zero, right? So like they're going to play out that high power card. Maybe they played a high power card on 5, and then on 6, they're going to play another one, whether a Taskmaster or something else. And so you can kind of choose which location you affect with Valkyrie, which I think is powerful. And so, kind of one of those interesting things with snapping that comes into this idea of who has initiative, right, throughout the game, and how do you balance that? Like, I know there's times where it's like I've wanted to snap, but I feel like my opponent, because of the deck they're playing, is like, I know I'm going to have initiative going into the later turns of the game, right? And so then it becomes trickier, right? Should I snap? Should I not? Because they're going to maybe have just the better protection at the end of the game from what I can potentially do to them, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the thing with proactive decks is you're coming in with a game plan and you're kind of pushing for that game plan to work. If your game plan doesn't work, yeah, your deck crumbles like quite easily. So it's a difficult line to walk, but I think it's also quite like rewarding to be able to get those reads. So I personally like these kind of decks a lot.
Yeah, agreed. I think we have time for maybe two more decks here with the time we have left. So we'll jump into this one. So this is the old Electro Ramp Sandman, which really has seen more play. I mean, this particular build, we're looking at Sunspot, Iceman, Ebony Maw, Electro, Wave, Leech, Black Panther, Sandman, Arnim Zola, Doctor Doom, Odin, and America Chavez. For those who are only listening, this has seen, I'd say a fair amount of play since the changes to Sandman in the last couple of weeks, which brought his cost up, but also his power, retaining his ability to you and your opponent can only play one card per turn. So I'm guessing if you can Electro Wave into Sandman, depending on the deck you're playing against, that's a pretty easy snap combination in my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And this is actually the deck that we were talking about for Nimrod. I think this is a very easy inclusion for Nimrod, where you would just put Nimrod on turn 5 and have Arnim Zola and then Odin, which is basically a second Black Panther. But this is another very proactive deck. And once again, like the snap is a lot, if not almost only about once you figured out that your game plan is going to be good against your opponent, you need to snap. Like, because you almost need to snap before you get to Electro, because once you have Electro down, everyone kind of knows what's gonna happen afterwards. So they have the punish or they don't. It's very like reductive to say it this way, but it actually kind of is the way it's going to go down.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much a hand snapping deck because you're not very flexible. You don't have many tech cards. There are different ways of building the deck to include more tech cards if that's what you fancy. But I'm like, these are parts of the deck where I think it's absolutely not worth it trying to make it complicated. Like, you have a deck and just play what the deck gives you because that's how it's built.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you said some statement kind of early on that, like, as soon as you know your combo, like, you have the combo pieces, but you know it's going to be good against what your opponent's playing, right? Because if you're playing this against something like Shuri Zero, where they're only wanting to play one card per turn, or there's other decks like that, like this, it doesn't really help you, right, in the same way. I mean, it can, but often this is going to be best about something that's trying to flood the board throughout the game or late in the game, right? Things like Thanos, it plays well against that, or things like Mr. Negative, things with Sarah, all of these things, right, where your opponent's trying to play into that ability to play more cards later in the game. You kind of have to feel some level of confidence that the snapping is going to be a good choice because of the matchup, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like there are three kind of decks in Marvel Snap. Like, if I go really broadly, there's like the flexible ones that are able to do everything, and currently they're dominating the game, which is Thanos, Lockjaw, and Shuri Zero. They're the ones that are coming in with their own game plan and they're trying to force it onto the opponent, which are kind of the decks that we're seeing now. And then there are the reactive ones, which have like built based on what they expect their opponent to do in their metagame, which is Sarah. And all these decks like kind of have their own way of snapping, but the more time passes and the more Marvel Snap looks like a lot of other card games where the same decks kind of come back a lot and recognition is starting to be much easier to do. So the easiest your deck is to be recognized, and the earlier you have to snap, because otherwise you're not going to keep anyone in games.
That is, I think, some great advice that we all should take into account as we're playing the game. But we are just out of time with the time we have here to record today. But I really appreciate this conversation, Den. It's a tricky conversation. By no means are we the perfect experts on this topic, but I think there's a lot that could be discussed and can continue to be discussed in the community about snapping strategy for different types of decks, right? In a lot of ways, we've learned so much with Marvel Snap, but I still think as the game continues to grow, there's still so much we can talk about and strategies we can discuss with this.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel Snap at the end of the day is still very new. Like it's still a game that I don't think anyone has like finished Marvel Snap. Like I don't think anyone can say, yeah, I think I'm done with the game. I know everything there is to do to know and everything. And I mean, the day someone's gonna say that is probably gonna get hit with a balance patch anyway. So he just gets to relearn everything anyways. So yeah, I think like there's definitely a lot of things that can be done, whether it's in the snap strategy, in the deck building department. Like I think the game is much deeper than we want to allow ourselves to believe that it is. So yeah, like let's try stuff. Let's be creative, and especially in the snap department. Like snapping is as much as like us as players, it's also our opponent is involved in our snapping, because it's do they accept it or not. So we have to think about how they're going to see the snap. Otherwise, like it's never gonna work.
Yep. Constant retreats. If you snap at the inopportune times, right? So
exactly.
Well, thank you again for being on the show this week. Really appreciate it, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Whenever you want to have me, like I'm having a blast every time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for kind of checking out this first time where we have videos as part of the podcast. So make sure you are subscribed to the Marvel Snap Zone YouTube channel so you can catch us every week. And as we ask every week, if you are listening to this on YouTube, please leave a like, a comment, all of those great things so that we can get more reach, more people coming back. And if you were listening to this on a podcasting platform, please leave a rating so that we can get more people finding our podcast and kind of surfacing the podcast on those podcasting platforms. With all that being said, we thank you for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks.